My name is Bob Kershaw. I'm one of the guides for the cultural experience. I'm an ex-army officer. I've served in the Middle East, South Africa, North America, active service in Northern Ireland, First Gulf War and Bosnia. Left the army about 9 years ago. I'm now a professional author and I'm just completing my 12th book. My favourite battlefield, I think, is the little Bighorn in Montana, South Dakota. Primarily because it's such a dramatic location in terms of the terrain. It really is epic countryside, big sky country, and the events that happened there were so dramatic. Custer's Last Stand isn't really what Hollywood depicts. It's a very dramatic story. Custer wasn't in any way particularly reckless. He took some wrong decisions, but he took decisions that people with his American Civil War experience as a cavalry commander would have taken. But the battlefield is relatively unspoilt. I say relatively because there are some marble mausoleums on it now, but you can really transport yourself back to the time and tell the story and take people back to that age simply by identifying and looking at the terrain around you, which is truly magnificent, epic. In my opinion, the most influential general perhaps in the Second World War is the German Erich von Manstein, who really was the cerebral force behind the Blitzkrieg in France, and he was such a creative planner and effective executor of the operational art. He saved the German front probably after the collapse at Stalingrad by a series of brilliant counter moves where he restored the situation on the Eastern Front in the winter following the surrender at Stalingrad. And it's not generally known that the battle at Kursk was probably won by the Germans in the sense that they held the ground at the end of the battle, but of course they lost that aspect of the campaign. But his influence on operations at that time really saved Germany, I believe, at that stage from a potential catastrophe. What I really enjoy working with the TCE is that we are able to go to really off the tourist trail locations, really dramatic places. You get the choice really of the battlefield that you feel that you would like to portray, and you go to these places and you can still identify with the history actively at those places, because we tend to pick places that most of the tourists will not go to. And I simply enjoy the travel, and in particular travelling away from the main tourist trail, and there are ample opportunities with the TCE to do this. One of the most memorable things that happened to me, I think, is in terms of the history. I take clients across the Borodino battlefield, where there was a battle both in 1812 and 1941, and it didn't occur to me initially, but having studied the terrain and walked the ground on a number of occasions, I came up with a realization of the obvious, that the two battles occurred in the same place, but not only did they occur in the same place, they occurred on the same line. The enemy was coming from the same direction, the French in 1812, the Germans in 1941. And the Russians adopted the same positions at both times. And really this is fascinating to compare and contrast the two periods really in military history, and how the Russians dealt with both invasions and how close they were actually to the outskirts of Moscow. I think the primary attraction that brought me to military history was probably the film world. When I was a kid, I used to watch the Hollywood epics of about the ancient Greeks and the Battle of Marathon. The film I remember earliest was probably Helen of Troy. I'd read the Iliad and I was attracted to it. And then in time, watching other really epic films like Ben-Hur, later on Zulu, The Longest Day, really inspired me to find out more about those particular events. My favourite historical film is probably Saving Private Ryan, because I think it's such a realistic depiction of modern 20th century warfare. The sound effects in that film are just simply amazing, and the ability of the cameraman to get right down to the boots level of the soldiers landing on Omaha beach, I think is a very authentic depiction, especially because of the sounds. But I have other favourites as well. I think probably Zulu, primarily because epic subject, epic music, beautifully done, an ageless film, I think, even today. And in terms of spectacle, I suppose Eisenstein's War and Peace and the Battle of Waterloo. Simply as a spectacle, so well done that they become memorable. I've got 2 battlefields on my bucket list that I still haven't got to do yet. The first one would be Dien Bien Phu in Vietnam, which I would love to either visit or guide. Fascinating battle, well off the beaten track. And the other one, surprisingly enough, is the Alamo, which I was first attracted to as a young kid watching the John Wayne film. Fantastic, epic, and I know the original mission station is still amongst a bunch of skyscrapers, but it's still on my bucket list of things to do. Probably the biggest military blunder is that really committed by Adolf Hitler during the Second World War in the invasion of the Soviet Union, which was foolish in the extreme, both in terms of the logistics that would be required, the scale of operations, and the constant litany of failures, historical failures, that preceded it. And then to follow that by declaring war on the United States was just the height of stupidity, really, taking on the 2 most powerful nations in the world at that time, and the second one, there was no need to do it anyway. I think one of the biggest myths currently today is the Blackadder view of British generalship in the First World War, which hasn't been effectively debunked as yet, primarily because most people's view of the British General Staff is based on stories like this. When you look at the technology of the day and really the intellectual capabilities of these generals, they weren't fools. They tried to do what they could within the limited technological means they had at hand. And to blame stupidity as the cause for the enormous bloodletting of the First World War is, to my mind, too simplistic a conclusion.